So good afternoon, everybody. So little late here. So I'm scheduled to go till 5:45. So I'm gonna potentially speak somewhat rapidly here. But I was feeling inspired to share some information with you all about some aspects of the alchemical tradition, the Western alchemical tradition from Europe. And specifically in regards to a critical principle that we see illustrated in the alchemical tradition that is a vital component of plant medicine that is missing from what we see in a lot of modern herbal pharmacy. So really excited to share that with you and talk a little bit about Spagyrics, because alchemy was an important part of the Renaissance era model of medicine and healing. We see, herbalism, alchemy, and astrology all very much interwoven during that time period, and we see in our world today that alchemy is kind of on this upward surge, right? That it's becoming much more. Information is being much more commonly available. A lot of people are becoming much more interested in alchemy again, and it's interesting observing the history of alchemy. It kind of goes in these peaks and valleys where everyone's doing it and kind of, it's very popular, and then it's made illegal and forced into the underground, and I think we're kind of moving into one of those upward slopes again, which I think is great, because I think a lot of ancient alchemical principles are now actually being confirmed by modern science, which I think is very fascinating. So one aspect of, let me move this a little bit closer. So one aspect of the Western alchemical tradition that I wanted to speak to today is called Spagyrics. And Spagyrics is essentially plant-based alchemy. Now in the alchemical tradition, we see Spagyrics is focused on plants, whereas alchemy is more focused on minerals and metals, right? And so in alchemy, they say everything in the natural world can be produced into a medicine, and so they don't just work with plants; they also work with poisons, essentially, right? Which they say the most toxic poisons are the most potent medicines. So we see things like mercury and antimony and lead and all these other things being used as medicines. But Spagyrics is focused on the plant aspect of alchemy, because plants are forgiving and safe and gentle and wonderful to work with. If you make a mistake distilling rosemary oil, you'll be fine. If you make a mistake distilling mercury, you die. So it's nice to kind of get your feet wet with the plant world first, because it's safe for the most part, depending on which plants you're working with. But there's very few plants that will kill you dead, right? There isn't really, compared to how many plants there are in the world, there's not that many that will kill you, right? So most of our medicines are very gentle and safe to work with. So Spagyrics. I'm just curious, has anyone heard of Spagyrics before? How many people here have heard? Okay, wow, see, that's amazing. Like a number of years ago, like maybe one person in the back corner would raise their hand right now. So it's great, a lot more people are learning about this. This word was invented by Paracelsus because he was so far ahead of his time. He had to make words up because his philosophy, like there wasn't even words that described what his realizations, right? His insights into nature and into medicine and healing. So he created this word Spagyrics to essentially denote herbal pharmacy, right? A certain method of herbal pharmacy. And I always think of Spagyrics as a method of herbal pharmacy that concentrates the physiological and the spiritual virtues of plants. So they say alchemy is that middle path, right? Not too far over here on the scientific side, not too far over here on the spiritual side. It's right in the middle, right? And that's why I like it so much, because I was trained in herbal sciences, so I have that scientific mind, but I also really have that deep spiritual connection and relationship to the plants too. A lot of like what Scott talks about too, right? So to me, alchemy is a really nice midpoint of that. Now, I have a friend in Greece that I've been corresponding with over the last number of years who speaks Greek, and so it's been really cool to talk to her about some of these Greek terms. And we typically, the way I was originally taught, the meaning of spagyrics is it comes from two Greek words, speo and agiero, which means to separate and recombine. But the way she says it's actually egiero, and the way that's typically spoken of is in Spagyrics, you separate the part into what they call its three philosophical principles: the sulfur, the mercury, and the salt, which I'm going to talk about in more detail here. And then you recombine it into what's considered an exalted state, or a more refined or evolved reflection or manifestation of that plant. So speo, separate, agiero, recombine, but she said actually the better translation of egiero is to awaken. And I thought that was very interesting. So it's really to dissolve or to separate, to break apart, and then to reawaken. And so that kind of shed some light on this term spagyrics in a totally different way for me that has kind of shifted my perspective on it in kind of a profound way. And that was just like a couple days ago, so I was really excited to share that with you all. So spagyrics, it's a very beautiful way of working with plants and a really cool understanding of how to prepare them medicinally. So one of the things, and maybe some of y'all can resonate with this, but like when I was first learning about herbal medicines and the preparations of plants, I always had this like problem of like throwing the plant away when I was done, right? You know, you make the anybody ever feel bad throwing the plant away after you tincture it, right? Yeah, it bugs me, really bugged me for years, and I was like, I always feel like there's something left in there, like there's got to be a way to, there's more medicine there. I just didn't know what it was, right? And so that medicine that's left in the plant when we throw it away after we're done extracting it is what I want to talk to you about today, because that was for me a huge missing link of the preparation of plants. And but to discuss that, I want to talk about the other two components. So central to alchemical philosophy is what they call tria prima, which is translated loosely to the three philosophical principles. These three philosophical principles, the holy trinity of life, right? And we see that pretty much every medical, spiritual, scientific tradition all around the world has some form of trinity, some sort of threefold pattern, right? In alchemy, they call it sulfur, let's see, sulfur, mercury, and salt, right? And the salt principle is what I'd like to discuss in more detail. You have to pardon me, I'm speaking quickly because I want to get as much in as I can here. But just briefly before I get into talking about the salt principle in more detail, I want to illustrate for you really quickly how universal this threefold pattern is, right? Because it pops up over and over and over again. And anytime you're studying some sort of tradition and see this kind of threefold division, it typically has a correspondence to these three philosophical principles of alchemy, right? This threefold division. That's why they call this the perennial philosophy, right? Or philosophia perennis, right? The perennial philosophy, that universal understanding of life and nature that isn't just unique to a certain tradition or geographic location or time frame, right? But it applies across the board, right? So, for example, in Ayurveda, right, we have the tridosha theory, right? People all heard of the three doshas of Ayurveda, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, right? Those are just other reflections of sulfur, mercury, and salt. And I guess maybe I'll write up how these correspond here so you can get a sense. And Kapha, right? We're talking about astrology a lot this weekend, right? And Judith was kind of mentioning as she went through the 12 signs of the zodiac, those three modes, right? Those three modes of astrology, right? They call cardinal, mutable, and fixed, right? Those three modes are the astrological reflection of these three philosophical principles, right? You have Pitta as like cardinal, it's active, it's dynamic. It's the energy that initiates a new season, right? The energy that brings in a new seasonal quality. Vata is mutable, changeable, constantly moving and changing and adjusting, right? And those mutable signs are at the end of a season, right? And that's exactly what they say in Ayurveda. Vata rules seasonal transition. It's the wind that blows one season out and a new season in. Right? And then Kapha is fixed, or the salt, which is when a season is in its pinnacle. How she was talking about Leo, right? Leo's like fixed fire ruled by the sun. It's the peak of the summer. It's the hottest time of the year, right? Leo. And then we see in, just to list off a few others, because I want to teach you how to use the salt principle in your herbal extraction. So just to illustrate these three principles in some other traditions, you have the three treasures of Chinese medicine, right? Jing, Qi, and Shen. Right? We have the three miasms of homeopathy, right? Psychosis, syphilis, and Sora. Kind of from more of a shamanic perspective, right? The upper, lower, and middle world, right? Or Middle Earth, eh?
Where do you see the upper, middle, and lower?
Upper, middle, lower. Yeah, because Mercury is that mediator. Yep.
Would the Shen be the mutable?
I consider Jing to be Pitta, or like sulfur, because it's essence. And Mercury to be Shen, because it's the spirit, Mercury. And then Qi to be salt. That's just the way I correspond them. You know, we have many different reflections of the threefold pattern, right? All across religion and spirituality and medicine and even science, right? We have the basis of the subatomic world, right? The proton, the neutron, and the electron, right? We can think of that as the three philosophical principles of kind of the subatomic world. So we see that trinity, right, is critical to life, that we live in a three-dimensional reality, right? Because those three dimensions are governed by these three principles. And the way they talk about it in alchemy is that the sulfur is the soul, the mercury is the spirit, and salt is the body. And if you're like me, you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between soul and spirit, right? We kind of tend to use those words synonymously. From the alchemical perspective, the soul is unique and individual. So my soul is different from your soul, is different from your soul, is different from your soul. All of us have a unique soul that's individual to us, right? That there's nothing like you here on the face of the entire universe, right? It's just, it's your uniqueness, that unique gift that you carry, right? That's your soul, it's your sulfur. But the spirit is universal. Right, so it's like the vital force, right? There's one spirit that moves through all things, that animating factor, right? I say the spirit also represents kind of our psychology and our emotions too. And then, of course, the body is our physical vehicle for the sulfur and the mercury, the soul and the spirit. Right, so these three philosophical principles are at the crux of all of Spagyrics. Everything in Spagyrics comes back to the separation or extraction of sulfur, mercury, and salt, the purification of those principles, and then their ultimate recombination. Right? So all of Spagyrics is based on those three aspects of it, right? So you have separation, purification, and what they call cohobation or recombination. Right. So the one aspect of this work that I really wanted to share with you today is the salts, because this is the one area of the energetics of plants, but also the chemistry of plants that's oftentimes overlooked. And for certain remedies, those minerals carry critical signatures for the medicinal virtue of that plant. For example, Matthew was talking about horsetail. right? When he was talking about the musculoskeletal system, right? Well, a majority of the way the signature of horsetail and the way it builds connective tissue and tendons and ligaments, right, is because it's one of the most concentrated botanical sources of silica, right? But most preparations of it won't contain that silica because it's thrown away with the herb when we throw the plant out, right? So so these salts are very critical, and I would like to teach you how to extract the salts so you can start working with that, right? Because it's a really important aspect of concentrating our medicines physically, but also energetically, but also being holistic, right? I mean, my whole approach to herbalism is I want to be holistic. And to me, the root of the word holistic is wholeness, right? Wholeness. So we want to use the wholeness of the plant, right? And the way, from an alchemical perspective, they say that the wholeness of the plant is going to treat the wholeness of the person. So in general, in plants, these three principles manifest as the essential oils is the sulfur, right? It's just like all of our souls are unique and individual. You know, you got lavender and clove and rosemary and cinnamon, and right, those are all very distinct smells, right? They're very distinct qualities in the plants. They're unique and individual to that plant. The essential oil is also the lightest weight part of the plant. It's the lightest, most volatile kind of spiritual part of the plant, right? It's like you boil some water and you pour it over a plant. What's the first thing that comes out? Essential oil, right? So from an alchemical perspective, they say that essential oil, it's like the lightest part of the plant. It's the part of the plant that's most connected to the invisible world. And it's kind of cool if you think about it. Like, think of an essential oil containing plant. Like, you're standing in front of the lavender, right? And you're standing there and there's this plant growing, right? You see the plant and you're smelling it. You can smell it just in the air, right? That plant is existing, literally that plant is existing outside of its physical body. It's kind of amazing to think about, right? It's like, here's this plant and it's emitting these lightweight aromatic molecules that are traveling through air and space, and you're breathing them, you're smelling them, and it's having an effect on you, right? It's like, I was thinking about that one day. I was like, wow, that plant's like having an outer body experience. But it's true, right? I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. So the essential oil is the sulfur. That's typically extracted through distillation of the plant. The spirit of the plant, from an alchemical perspective, they say it's the alcohol. If you take any plant, you throw it in a bucket, you let it putrefy and rot, right? You let it ferment, it will always yield ethyl alcohol, right? Leaves or flowers or barks or seeds or roots or grass clippings, whatever. Just let it putrefy and it will always yield ethyl alcohol. And so, again, the difference between an alchemist and a chemist is that an alchemist sees meaning, right? They see meaning in chemical substances, whereas a chemist just sees molecular weight and properties and how many molecules are in it or something, right? It's like the difference between an astronomer and astrologer. An astronomer sees mathematical equations and physics, whereas an astrologer sees meaning, right? And I think a lot of these times are about re-sacralizing those old sciences, right? So the alchemists saw that and they said, oh, the alcohol, it's the universal spirit of the plant kingdom. All plants have it, all plants generate it, right? So it's universal in the same way that there's one spirit that flows through all things. And that's where we get the term spirits for alcohol, right? It comes from alchemy, those distilled spirits. Now in our modern day, kind of more pharmacological understanding, I also like to translate the mercury of a plant to its alcohol and water-soluble constituents, right? The intelligence of the plant, the mind of the plant, the mercury, right, is conducted through the chemistry. So it's, and again, not too spiritual and not too scientific, right? That it's not just the chemistry, right? The chemistry is but a physical vehicle through which the higher spiritual force of the plant works through, the intelligence of the plant works through. Okay, and then lastly we have the salt principle, which is the mineral alkali, or the alkaline salts. And this is the one piece that's the missing piece, right? This is what brought everything full circle for me when I first learned about these salts. So you have the salt principle. It's the body of the plant, right? And I kind of like to think about like, oh geez, like what if none of us had bodies? You know, it's like, oh, it'd be really hard to impact the physical world without a body, right? And so you think about medicine like that too, you know, it's like, okay, you know, we want our medicines to be anchored into the physical body, and it's that salt principle in alchemy that carries the spirit and the soul of the plant into its body. So the salt of a plant is like its delivery mechanism. It's just like all of our bodies that we're in right now, right? It's like that's how our intelligence, our mind, our feeling, and our soul are able to be here in this physical world, right? It's the same way for the plants. And so the inclusion of the salt principle into a medicine is said to anchor the intelligence and anchor the soul of that plant back into its physical body, and therefore it will have a higher physiological affinity, right? It drives it deeper into the tissues, and tends to be effective at lower dosages and more efficiently and effectively. So the salts is the minerals, and it's extracted in a process called calcination. I just want to clarify, calcination, not calcification, calcination, right? And calcine basically means to make white. To make white. And so, you know, you think about, say we were talking about lavender earlier, right? So say you have some fresh lavender and you make a tincture out of it, right? And there's a bunch of essential oils in lavender, and maybe you want to pull those oils out. So you can use a higher proof alcohol, say like a 70% alcohol, right? And you tincture that lavender. Well, that tincture is going to draw off the essential oils, the sulfur, as well as the alcohol and water soluble constituents, the mercury, right? So every tincture, just tinctures as a whole, contain the sulfur and the mercury of plants, right? Once that tincture is pressed, it's the marc, right, the leftover plant material that contains that salt principle. And that was the thing I always felt really guilty about throwing in the compost bin. And so in order to extract that mineral, those minerals in the plant, we take it through a process called calcination. And in short, it's burning the plants down, right? So we're going to burn the plants down to an ash. And the way that is commonly done, there's different ways you can do it, but if you use a high enough proof alcohol, you can just take a match to it and it'll just light right on up. But I typically do my calcinations in a wood stove. If you don't have access to a wood stove, you can do it on a barbecue. That's how my teacher does it. He does it outside in the barbecue. And he always jokes around. He says, "Yeah, I just tell my neighbors I'm a really bad cook." It's like putting up this black, acrid, really stinky smoke, right? my first calcination was on my apartment porch when I was in college, and that was the excuse I used. My neighbors were like, "Should I call the fire department?" I'm like, "No, I'm just burning my dinner." So calcination. So I'd like to teach you how to extract these minerals. Okay, so you have your marc, your plant material that you've extracted. That can either be through tincturing, that can be through distillation, fermentation, lots of different ways to extract the sulfur and the mercury. But our main process here is calcination, and that is going to yield an ash. Right? Obviously, you burn things down and it generates an ash. So you're opening the plant up with the fire element. Everything in alchemy is about volatilizing fixed things of the earth, volatilizing them into the heavens, and then fixing them back into the earth. Volatilizing to the heavens, fixing them back into the earth. And that's what generates what they call circulations, right? It's a circulation. And that's why alchemy is always represented by the Ouroboros, right? The snake eating its own tail. It's that cycle of regeneration, right? Of death and rebirth. That's why it's a very kind of Scorpio art, right? It's very much this death and rebirth process. And so this is the death of the body of the plant. So you calcine it down to an ash. Depending on the plant material, it'll typically be black ash or grayish. Some plants will calcine to a very nice white color. It just depends on the plant. But essentially what you do here is next you want to, this is always everyone's favorite part because you get to use your mortar and pestle. Right, which I always find, when I started doing this work, there was always something, ancient memories of, you know, past lives or whatever, I don't know, but sitting in front of a fire with a mortar and pestle, just grinding salts all morning long, right? It's like, oh, this seems really familiar. So you grind it in the mortar and pestle. So you open it up with the fire and you open it with the earth. That grinding action, just like the way chewing, right? The way we chew, kind of to mechanically break our food down. It's the same way with this. So you're grinding and you're opening up the body of the plant, and then you recalcine it. And then you, after calcining it more, you grind it more, and you just keep grinding and firing and grinding and firing, grinding and firing and grinding and firing over and over and over again, right? Sometimes this can take a very long time. Certain plant salts I've worked with have required grinding and firing the plant every day for months. And the goal here is you want to yield a pure ash of the plant, a pure calcined ash, which we can determine it's complete by three primary qualities. The first is the color. Should be white. Right? Of course, that's the root of our word calcine. Should be white in color. Now, not all plants will calcine to like nice pearly white like this board, right? Some of them will be more of a grayish color, but it'll be a light gray to white color. I tend to be very auditory, just in general. I have very sensitive ears, so I'm always listening to it, so it should be silent. So I always say, like, when you're grinding the salts, you're grinding it, it should be like really quiet when it's done. If you're hearing all this crunching and grinding and, you know, it shows that it's not fully opened, right? So when you're grinding it should be like really silent. And then the third quality is softness, right? And usually when you're grinding salts, the ash, it's almost like, if anybody ever do like gymnastics, right? You put your hands in the chalk and it's like so soft, it doesn't even feel like you're touching anything. That's how you want your ash to be, right? So when I originally learned Spagyrics, they just said white. It was just do it till it's white, you know? And I realized after having calcined probably close to 300 plants over the last 8 years that white wasn't the only quality to determine if the ash is complete. That if you waited for a pearly white ash, you'd probably be firing a salt forever, right? That there's these other qualities that determine when it's complete. So this is this initial stage of the extraction of the mineral alkali, or the body of the plant, is opening up the body of the plant through fire and through the earth, right? Through the burning and the grinding, the earth and the fire, okay? And so what you're doing on a chemical level, right, is you're burning off all of the structural components of the plants, right? All the fiber and all the cellulose and all the kind of structural elements that give it its shape, and you're breaking it down to all of its minerals, right? The alkaline minerals. And so the next step in the process is a process called dissolution. And this would be purification by water. And it's very simple. You basically take your ash and you place it in your trusty mason jar. And if you were to visually, if that was to be 1 part, right, you just visually do 1 part ash to 3 parts water. So 1, 2, 3 parts water. Ideally distilled water, ideally, even more ideally, distilled rainwater. Caught in a thunder and lightning storm. That's the best water, they say in alchemy. Next to dew, collected dew is considered the best water. Dew caught in the early spring. And the way they would do that is tie 4 stakes to the ground and tie a sheet to it just above the ground, and then catch all of the dew and go out really early in the morning and wring the dew out. And they said that dew captures the celestial fire of the earth, right? The radiation of the earth, the out-breath of the earth, right? It's that warm out-breath of the earth that kind of condenses into that water of dew, that's dew. And so they say that dew has magical properties, which is why Lady's Mantle is so it's Alchemilla, little alchemist. Yeah?
Yeah, there's a great article in the winter issue of Wise Traditions, which is the Sally Fallon Price thing on the discovery of water. There's a 4th phase of water, and it turns out that when sunlight hits water on a hydrophilic surface, water-loving surface, which can be as small as a polymer or a molecule, that it changes the water to H320. And it changes the properties, and all the water in our body is actually H320.
Right.
But at any rate, that would actually be all the dew and all the rain. Like, as long as it's falling on an organic surface, it would always be that H320.
Oh, interesting, huh?
Yeah, and it actually, the vapor in the sky that makes a thunderstorm, that's actually H320. So,
oh, interesting.
Really
So
worthwhile article to read.
oh, wow. So it's got an extra hydrogen there. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And it produces, and then it produces an H3O negative, like O1, like negative as well, and then 2 of the one and 1 of the other bind together. Produces a liquid crystalline substance is what they said.
Oh, wow.
That's what's in that's the matrix water and all that.
Oh, interesting.
And the blood, and actually one of the things, it's long been known from Steiner's work actually that the blood moves on its own. It's not pumped by the heart. Actually,
right.
It's unbelievable. But this guy, Gerald Pollack, who's a scientist in Washington, showed that the water is attracted to H3O2 is attracted into tubes, and it actually travels on its own. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so this is important alchemical that verifies the whole thing.
Right. Oh, interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's awesome. See, that's what I'm talking about. Science is clarifying, you know, and validating what the ancients have been saying all along. We see that in a lot of different traditions. So what we're doing here is when you pour that water, you know, you think distilled water is empty water, right? You got well water, you have spring water. There's all these dissolved elements in that water, right? And so the reason they use distilled water is because it's an empty water. It's like a vacuum, and it wants to dissolve things. Like water, it's relationship, right? It wants to be in relationship with it, wants to dissolve things. That's why it's generally recommended not to drink distilled water all the time, right? Because they say it can actually leach minerals out of the tissues. But this is what we're doing, right? We're leaching minerals out of this ash. And so you pour 3 parts distilled water to 1 part ash. And what that's going to do is dissolve all of the water-soluble mineral salts. And the insoluble minerals will just stay solid, right? They'll precipitate and stay solid there. Okay, so then what you do there is, let's see, I'll just say ash plus water. That's the traditional glyph for water, the downward facing triangle, which kind of shows that descending quality. And then what you do there is simply filter it through a very complex alchemical piece of equipment called the coffee filter. Unbleached is ideal. So you just filter it through a coffee filter, and all you're doing there is that they call it separation. So you're separating the solid from the liquid, right? And that generates, you have your dissolved salt And then you have your one byproduct from this process, which they call caput mortuum. Caput mortuum, which means deadhead. Right? I'm trying to think of a Grateful Dead joke right now, but I can't think of anything. It's like, I don't know, Jerry Garcia was now. Anyways, so then what you do here, I'm running out of space and time. So from there, you just evaporate the water, right? So you have this water with all these dissolved minerals in the water, and then you just simply gently, slowly evaporate the water, right? There's all these great paradoxes in alchemy, and one of them is make haste slowly. Right? Hurry up, but take your time. So not too quick, right? They always say the gentlest fire is the best fire. The gentlest fire is the best fire, right? Because what's critical, and I wish I had more time to talk about this, but what's critical is that there's meaning in all of these processes, right? That everything in alchemy that you're doing externally is going on internally. Everything that, I always say the spagyric process isn't complete until you put those first drops on your tongue. Because the operator is taking this plant through this rite of passage, through this initiation, this symbolic and actually literal death and rebirth process. That's just one half, right? Everything in alchemy is as above, so below. So the process isn't complete until you ingest that spagyric medicine, and now that plant's going to take you through calcination, dissolution, separation, right? And that's how they call it initiatic medicine. It has a virtue, right? It has a virtue that operates upon the soul. So you evaporate that water, and as all the water evaporates, you basically, all the minerals that were dissolved into that solution crystallize. So you literally grow plant crystals, and it's the coolest thing ever. It's really amazing to see, like literally see like double terminated little, like they look like quartz crystals from plants. And you really start to see like our mineral-rich medicines, nettle, horsetail, you see all of those minerals, like it's incredible, right? You know, you take 50 pounds of burdock root or something, and greater celandine or something, right? And it just burns down to like this much ash. You know, you take that same weight of horsetail or nettle, and you have just like tons of ash, right? And these big crystals and really beautiful. You know, each plant crystallizes in very different shapes and textures, and some of the crystals are very volatile, actually kind of grow up the walls of the jar. Different colors. I mean, it's amazing, the spectrum, right? And the reason I wanted to talk about this is, and then you basically scrape those up and add them back into your tincture, right? And that's the most simple, basic form of spagyric. They call it the spagyric tincture. Right? And there's much more complex forms of spagyrics that are much more involved. Some processes take years to complete. They call quintessences, or plant stones, or magistries, or the ends, or essences. There's many different forms of, they're all spagyrics, just different types of spagyrics. But what I love about this process is that you use the wholeness of the plant, right? You use the wholeness of the plant, and there's something for me about that embodiment, right? That's what kind of, from an alchemical perspective, they say it's embodied medicine. You're literally anchoring the soul and the spirit of the plant back into its physical vehicle that drives it deeper into the tissues. And as I was saying earlier, for some of our medicines, those minerals hold critical signatures for that plant. I was mentioning horsetail and the silica, right? Well, think of urtica and the iron content, right? That iron is a delivery mechanism for Mars, right? That's like the microcosmic molecule that connects it to that celestial force of Mars, is that iron. Well, like a nettle extract without those mineral salts is lacking a portion of that signature. And I want to be really clear and clarify that I'm not in any way saying that non-spagyric medicines are ineffective or don't work. I'm not saying that at all. right? They're absolutely effective. I mean, I still use powders and decoctions and infusions, right? I mean, it's not like, whoa, we're just going to throw everything away and just do Spagyrics. No, it's all good, right? But I'm just saying that for me, I think there's something that was very profound in the integration of this salt principle in the way that it really taught me about kind of just this anchoring process. And for me, over the years of working with the mineral salts of plants, I've found that my understanding of the holistic application of herbal medicines has become much more solidified, right? And there's this understanding that comes through working with the salts of the plants that I think teaches everyone in their own unique way. But everything in alchemy, it's like the process itself is a teacher. And so for me, there's some really beautiful teachings in the the salt principle and the mineral salts of plants, and I found it to be very rewarding, and that the medicines that are produced from that are very, very profound. So so I'll call that it. I'll take some questions just very quickly though, because I don't want to take up too much time.
On a practical level, what percentage do you add back in?
Oh, the entire amount, right? Because that amount of salt is determined to the mercury and sulfur, right? So like when you're doing a full essence, however much essential oil you yield is the exact ratio of salt that's present in that plant. So they're specific for one another. Yeah. Yes.
Would you consider like the end of that process to be the goal?
Well, no, not necessarily. Yeah, no, this is more of a pretty simple process. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily consider that. Yeah, yes.
If you're doing this sort of thing at home, what would you use to burn it in?
Crucibles are the most ideal vessel for calcination. Neutral clay dishes, Seattle Pottery Supply. You can order crucibles from them. Yeah, yes.
Could you write the word spagyric?
Sure, yeah.
And my question is, when you get to the crystalline stage, and then I got the idea you can go off in a lot of different directions.
Correct.
What would be maybe one example or something?
One example would be for example, the plant stone, where you have the essential oil, you have the distilled mercury or alcohol of the plant, and all the crystalline minerals. Rather than putting them all back together for a liquid medicine, and so in alchemy everything's volatile and fixed. So volatile medicines are liquid, fixed medicines are solid, and the fixed medicines would be another example of the salt principle. So you can actually very slowly add the sulfur and the mercury, the oil, and the mercury of the plant, slowly add it back into the salts, and then you seal it and let it digest for 40 days and 40 nights, and then you slowly add more back in, and the salts will take in the sulfur and mercury and ultimately congeal into a stone.
And you're really putting mercury in there. I mean, I'm a Chinese herbalist.
Yeah, not literal mercury, philosophical mercury, right, which would be the distilled alcohol of the plant. Yeah. Yeah, there are works in alchemy with mercury for sure. Yeah, but yeah, we're just focusing on the plants here. Yes.
Do you do anything with the caput mortuum?
There are processes you can do with the caput mortuum. Primary is called the elixir, which is, of course, is the root of our word elixir, but the traditional elixir is a solid medicine. The caput mortuum is recalcined at very high temperature till it yields a bright red ash. And then the tincture is slowly cohobated until it forms a blackish paste, and they say that cleanses kind of the underworld, the lower parts of the self, kind of deeper level stuff.
So
yeah.
Do you do that often? Or
No.
Do you tend to just like go in my garden, or what do you do with them?
I give them back to the fire.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Just a clarifying question, do you distill the dew or rainwater?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I just mentioned on that level with the water, you can take it further and distill. If you're working the same level or like a moon herb, you could distill your water with each day of the week. You could have different like moon water, sun water, mercury water for each planet. and then use that for the specific plant that you're working with.
Yes.
There's so many levels you can take it.
Yeah.
And one thing that you forgot to mention too is just when you're soaking it in the ash, that water there, you want to let that sit for like 24 hours before you filter it.
Yeah.
It needs to sit for a little bit.
Yeah, correct. Okay, everybody, I don't want to take up too much time, so thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Yeah.